Welcome to Bottom Up, a monthly podcast dedicated to issues and topics of interest to young lawyers in Wisconsin and beyond. I'm Emilio Villagale.
And I'm Kristen Hardy, and we're your hosts. This is the Bottom Up Podcast.
Good day. Welcome to the Bottom Up Podcast. I was looking at a fresh look at existing info, analyzing 30 years of law school graduate employment data. And what I was seeing was not a lot of increases in the jobs available in the legal profession, including in the Milwaukee area. There's been significant declines in the last 2 decades, especially for attorneys who graduated between 2010 and 2020. And I think currently the situation is still somewhat dire for attorneys who are just graduating and looking to get into those first years of practice. I wanted to talk about that a little bit. I have a guest, and I'm pleased to have him on. He is the president of the Young Lawyers Division. His name is Anthony Procaccio. Anthony, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
For those of you who are listening right now, you'll note that it's not Emil and Kristen. I am Joe Forward. I'm the communications director for the State Bar of Wisconsin, and I invited Anthony out to the State Bar Center to talk about this topic. Anthony graduated in 2013 from Marquette University Law School. He has an interesting story about his path to his current role. He currently works for a small to mid-sized firm called Randall S. Miller and Associates in Milwaukee. But up to that point, he had some different types of jobs since graduating, and I think a somewhat challenging path to get to where you are. Would you say that?
Yeah, challenging and winding.
Winding and challenging.
Definitely not traditional.
Let's just give the listeners an overview of what you do now in practice. So you're in court most of the time?
Yes. Yeah. There's a lot of hearings and motion hearings and the routine stuff as well. And so it is a pretty court-heavy practice area.
What made you want to go to law school?
I think I was probably the typical argumentative kid who everybody said should be a lawyer. So I kind of always had that in my head. Both my parents really, really valued education for my brother and I. They were both immigrants. My mom had a high school education. My dad didn't even have a high school education. So for them, having that background, higher education was pretty paramount. And so for my brother and I, we both pretty much quickly identified what we would do, knowing we were expected to go to college and do something. And so that was part of it. And we were a big Italian family. Lots of dinner table, especially with extended family arguments and discussions and debates. And it's definitely the type of family where if there was an argument and, my uncle would say, go get the encyclopedia, let's look it up, figure this out. Like, we're not just going to sit here and argue. We're going to do some research. We're going to find out what the answer is. So it definitely came from an upbringing that really valued that analytic, finding the answers to problems. And so that was kind of, from a pretty young age, I was always had the intention of going to law school. It was really law school or race car driver, and one of those fell off pretty quick.
Right.
Yeah, that's always been the mindset that I had going into college and then into law school.
And so when you arrived at Marquette Law School, did you have some inkling of what you thought you might want to do, or what was your law school experience like?
I definitely had a plan going in, which maybe I don't recommend because I closed myself off to some opportunities thinking I want to pursue criminal defense. That was my undergraduate degree was in criminology. Even during law school, I really took a lot of the advanced criminal practice courses. That's kind of really where I focused a lot of my studies. A few years later, when I actually did start practicing, and it was in criminal defense, it was my first job practicing, I really, really did not like it at all. That's kind of when I realized there's a big difference between the academic study of a subject and then the real nitty-gritty practice of it. That was my plan going in, was to do criminal defense.
So what was it about criminal defense that you disliked? Were you taking public defender cases, or
Yes, it was mostly taking on public defender appointments, pretty high volume amount. There's a lot of misdemeanors, especially starting out. But this was one of the things where I maybe just didn't have the right disposition or temperament for it, because and I've had this conversation with other people that I know that have done criminal law, especially as public defenders. I felt pretty powerless in the process as the attorney, because everybody gets to make these decisions. The client gets to decide if how they're going to plead, if they're going to testify. Prosecutors making the charging decisions, judges making their decisions, and the defense attorneys are sort of just like reacting to everything.
Mm-hmm.
You can advise as much as you want, and they're not going to listen to you and blame you after that. But I always felt like I kind of had the least amount of control or power in it, and that really was something I was not equipped to handle.
Mm-hmm.
That was really a big part of what I disliked about it. And then partially was just not really feeling like I was in an environment where a good amount of sort of mentoring or nurturing was happening.
Yeah.
And then so there was like a professional and a personal component to just really disliking that area of practice.
And was that your first job?
That was my first job practicing.
When you came out of law school, your first job out of Marquette Law School, you were working for UW Milwaukee taking public records requests.
That's right.
Okay.
So when I first graduated, and this kind of goes into what I said before about having sort of mixed feelings about law school. I graduated honestly not knowing if I wanted to practice and really not knowing if I wanted to be a lawyer at all.
Mm.
And I had found a position. It was at UW Milwaukee. It was basically handling public records requests as the records custodian. And it was legal adjacent. The person who hired me was an attorney as well, who had just never practiced.
Uh-huh.
And it's a pretty large university, so they get a pretty large amount of these records requests, and they got to be handled in a certain way. So it really did use a lot of sort of legal research and writing skills in responding to these requests, but I wasn't practicing, so I thought that's what I wanted. It wasn't too much longer after that I kind of started to feel that, maybe, again, my perception going into things, my plan just was not based on the best information, and getting into the workforce and experiencing sort of work and what different jobs were, and working with the University Legal Counsel and kind of seeing oh, okay, that job, I like that job.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I do like the practicing part of it.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
Created by Wisconsin lawyers in 1986 to protect the financial future of lawyers like themselves and the clients they serve, Wilmick continues to demonstrate a leading commitment to Wisconsin's legal community. No company is more trustworthy than Wilmick when you're facing a legal malpractice claim. Put your trust in your premium with an insurance company that supports Wisconsin legal associations and events. Wilmick, insuring and supporting the legal community since 1986. State Bar of Wisconsin members have access to affordable insurance plans, including term life, accident, critical illness, and accidental death and dismemberment. Coverage is issued by the Prudential Insurance Company of America. 4 plans for your financial future from one trusted source. For more information, visit wisbar.memberenroll.com.
Hi, Russell Nicolay here with Nicolay Law, Accident and Injury Lawyers. If you have clients that have been injured, my office would love the opportunity to help them get compensated and get their life back on track. We handle referrals and co-counsel relationships on injury cases all across Wisconsin.
Thank you. And now back to the Bottom Up Podcast.
I tried to start transitioning myself into a job where I could be practicing. And kind of as you touched on at the top, 2013 was a very bad year for legal grads. I think if I remember right, nationwide, it was 40,000 people were graduating from law school that year. And it was a high water mark for 40 years.
Yeah.
And that's just too many. That's too many lawyers entering the stream. And there were just no jobs. It was coming off an economic downturn. So there's a lot of experienced attorneys that were looking for work anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a tough year or two to find a job practicing. And, my thought was, well, this is legal adjacent, so I'll be close. And if I like it, great. And if I do want to practice, I can work my way back towards that. After a year there, I went to Foley & Lardner as an in-house conflicts resolution analyst. Again, that was was close. I was at a law firm. I was doing one pretty specific area of legal work related to professional responsibility and conflicts and resolving those issues. So I was still kind of close to the practice of law, but I wasn't quite doing it yet. And that's when I really started getting it. It had been about almost 3 years since I had graduated. And I kind of got the thought of, well, you know, if I don't start practicing soon, the farther and farther I get from that, I got the sense the harder it would be to get that first job, especially as I started getting higher salaries. And then all of a sudden I'm looking at taking a pay cut to get an entry-level attorney position. And it was basically ended up being what is the most affordable pay cut I can take to take a step back to the side to advance up a different path.
Right.
And that's how I got into practicing 3 years after I graduated.
What other activities or networking opportunities were you taking, if any, to keep within the legal profession network? Were you part of the Young Lawyers Division back then?
Actually, my first entry into volunteering with the state bar space was through a committee. I think it was through the bench bar committee. That was within the first couple of years. So I wasn't practicing at the time, but I had been put on that committee. So that was kind of the first thing I did, stay connected to the state bar. And then maybe it was a year later, I was at the Young Lawyers Conference that was in Milwaukee and was talking to a classmate and a friend of mine who was on the board. And, you know, he recommended, you know, running. And so then in the next year, I ended up running. And so it was a part of looking at the opportunities that the state bar has and kind of saying, how can I stay connected? Because then opportunity begets opportunity. And so part of it was using one volunteer opportunity to show that I was committed or serious to other things.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe made it easier staying connected to the state bar as a whole and that community of attorneys that if you become in contact with and start to hang out with a lot. So that was kind of how I stayed connected.
Yeah, I mean, I had a similar path after graduating in 2010, and I was in St. Louis. I wanted to come back here to Wisconsin because the rest of my family's here, and I wanted to be in Madison, and this job here at the State Bar as a legal writer opened up. But I remember, and it was a great job for me because I had some newspaper experience before then. But I remember 3 or 4 years into it having those same thoughts of, unless I want to stay here, if I don't get into the legal practice game at some point, I'm going to lose that opportunity. And so I did reach out to a local attorney and asked her if I could do some pro bono work for her. And I did that for a year. And then she started paying me as a side gig. So for the next 5 or 6 years, I did that just to keep myself in the game. And I think doing things like that for attorneys who may be experiencing a tough job market, or they're not in the role that they may want to be, have to do extra things to stay in the network and to meet people and to get experience where they can. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think having sort of been on both sides of like hiring decisions, it's always a risk. And sometimes people just want to know that you can put some sentences together and that you can write competently and clearly, and it doesn't have to be a brief, it doesn't have to be a motion or anything. It could just be an internal memo on a topic. And even when I was handling public records requests, and I drafted some guidance for the other departments, what we needed as a response and what the law said and what the policies were, and putting together an internal memo on a topic that references case laws and statutes, and hey, that's legal writing. And yes, you didn't do it at a law firm. It didn't happen for a quote client, but the point is somebody could see that and say, okay, this person, they know how to structure an argument, they know how to put things together, they know how to be clear and concise in their writing. So the decision to hire is less risky on a person who doesn't have any law firm, checks every box experience. And so, you can get that, find those opportunities at whatever job you're doing. Pro bono, again, that's a great way to get it there. Just try to write something for the state bar. There's kind of these little opportunities all around. And that's one of the things I've liked about what the Wisconsin bar does. They kind of have a lot of things that someone can do to get involved and to do some professional work, even if it's not paid attorney work at a law firm. And then it also gets you in contact with people that maybe their firm 6 months from now, somebody leaves, and it's always the easiest thing to say, does anybody know anybody who's looking for a job?
Yeah.
And that person says, oh yeah, my friend, he's not practicing right now, but he does this work and it's pretty close. And then all of a sudden you're in that, at least you're in the interview, and it's up to you from there.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
Hi, Russell Nicolay here with Nicolay Law, Accident and Injury Lawyers. If you have clients that have been injured, my office would love the opportunity to help them get compensated and get their life back on track. We handle referrals and co-counsel relationships on injury cases all across Wisconsin.
State Bar of Wisconsin members have access to affordable insurance plans, including term life, accident, critical illness, and accidental death and dismemberment. Coverage is issued by the Prudential Insurance Company of America. 4 plans for your financial future from one trusted source. For more information, visit wisbar.memberenroll.com. Created by Wisconsin lawyers in 1986 to protect the financial future of lawyers like themselves and the clients they serve, WILMIC continues to demonstrate a leading commitment to Wisconsin's legal community. No company is more trustworthy than WILMIC when you're facing a legal malpractice claim. Put your trust in your premium with an insurance company that supports Wisconsin legal associations and events. WILMIC, insuring and supporting the legal community since 1986.
Thank you. And now back to the Bottom Up Podcast.
What I found too was a lot of the work that lawyers do is not exclusive to practicing law. And sometimes you just have to spin what you do a little bit more to make that connection clearer. When I was handling conflict cases at Foley, it required a certain level of looking into what the rules of professional responsibility said, what the corporate structure of a proposed client was, what their counsel reviewing their outside counsel guidelines. These are all things that, I'm looking at statutes, I'm looking at contracts, engagement letters. That's all day-to-day lawyer stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes you kind of have to add that context to your resume to make it clear that, realistically, at big picture, you have the experience that they're looking for.
Yeah, it may not be exactly what the job would entail, but the skills that you learned in those previous roles definitely extend to what they're going to be asking you to do.
Right. Also sometimes you have to be a little creative about it. I know when I had interviewed for a job and there was a look at my resume having a little bit of volatility to it. One of the things I identified as a pro in that was that I kind of was familiar with jumping into new things and looking at things from a lot of different angles, because in one position I had to look at it through one lens, and then in a different position I was looking at it through another lens, and that kind of has been an asset of not getting pigeonholed into the way that I look at problems, and kind of being comfortable with stepping and looking at things from all different angles. So sometimes you kind of have to be a little shameless and a little creative to turn your perceived weaknesses into strengths, as to how it gives you a unique approach to the job.
Yeah, absolutely. Was that a question that you'd get? Would they say, well, it looks like you kind of bounced around a little, like, well, what direction are you headed?
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, anytime you're hiring somebody, there's a risk. And if you don't want to take that risk on someone that's going to leave soon. So that was definitely a thing that I got, or it was that I didn't have any experience in that specific area. And so a lot of times I would tell people, it's like, I learned quick, and that different experience is an asset, not a detriment.
Yeah. Once you got into the foreclosure area, it seems like you kind of found an area that was really interesting to you. What do you think it was about that practice area?
Yeah, it's kind of one of the weird mysteries of my life that is an area of practice that I really gravitated towards and found interesting. And I think this is why I think maybe going into law school with like a plan is not always the best course of action, because as I got into it, kind of learned all these little fascinating things about like title review and like looking at the history of deeds going back like generations to make sure that everything is like done right over the course of numerous transactions, and really unraveling a little maze of ownership history. Or, you know, it touches on probate because, you know, people die and they stop paying their mortgage, and then now there's an action that has to happen. And so now I'm in probate court, or I'm working with title review, I'm working with just real estate agents, working with sort of all these different people top of being in the courts, and kind of found that there's this weird little varied ecosystem that is in what kind of sounds like a pretty straightforward and monotonous area of practice. If you look at it from the outside, that was something that I kind of enjoyed. It was an area where I could gain proficiency. Had enough variety in there to keep things interesting. You know, I didn't take creditor debtor law in law school, so whenever things would come up that are like bankruptcy related, which is all the time, I'm always kind of leaning on one of my colleagues where that's really his thing is bankruptcy stuff. What sounds like a pretty narrow area of law, there's these whole practice areas that I just don't have any experience with, that I never pursued because I thought the plan was I'm going to do this area of law.
Right.
So even in undergrad, I took an accounting class by accident my freshman year, and I hated it. And I was like, this is the worst thing. When am I going to use this? And then, you know, looking over payment histories and statements and all these transactions and stuff, thought, yeah, maybe an accounting background would have been nice here.
Yeah.
So that was something where I got into that work like 6 or 7 years ago now, and I've kind of been on the creditor side of things ever since, just because I actually oddly found it a very enjoyable area of practice.
That practice area was also susceptible to some of the financial downturn that was happening during the past decade as well, right?
Right, yeah. It turned out to be a pretty volatile area because there was historic highs on foreclosures coming out of like the housing market crash, and then that all leveled off and then dropped down to 20, 30-year lows. And a lot of the firms, they grew and grew and grew, and then they couldn't sustain it. So then they had to start letting people go or closing up. And, you know, there's a lot of firm volatility within a couple of years after I had started in that area. And it kind of lasted for a little bit. And then, you know, a few years later, when I was at a different firm that did that line of work, COVID happened, and there was, you know, nationwide moratoriums on foreclosures and on evictions and all sorts of different creditor actions. And so, you know, the firms were not allowed to do their work anymore. And so that was like another area of volatility where I was let go and kind of had to figure it out on my own and move on to the next thing. Yeah, maybe I'm just a glutton for punishment. I kind of went to law school at the peak time. I entered these firms that were sort of at their most precipitous, and the chaos has always surrounded me a little bit.
Yeah.
And now, a word from our sponsors. What? You don't have an Ultimate Pass yet? Oh, that's a mistake. Find out why at wisbar.org/ultimatepass. In these uncertain economic times, the State Bar of Wisconsin wants to make sure that you and your practice have the best available tools. Ultimate Pass and Books Unbound are available for purchase using 6-month installment plans. Contact our customer service team at 1-800-728-7788 for more information. Thank you, and now back to the Bottom Up Podcast.
Well, Anthony, I wanted to switch topics a little bit and talk to you about the YLD, the Young Lawyers Division. You're the current president. You started on July 1st.
Right.
What kind of issues and challenges are you hearing from young lawyers in your work through the YLD?
The biggest thing we hear from young attorneys is the stress that comes with the job. The billable hour requirements, the need to always be on and plugged in and available. The the difficulty of learning a new job at the same time as being expected to do that job at a super high level all the time. You know, some people have really great mentors and some people don't. They don't have a mentor at all, or they're in a toxic work environment. You know, it's definitely a practice area that attracts some pretty intense people that are good at their job and not good at teaching other people how to do their job. And so it's definitely a stressful job to get into, especially coming off of 3 years of law school. You get into the job and you're like, well, I don't know how to do any of this. What has the last 3 years been about? Starting off, there's always these new experiences, and those are all very stressful if you don't have somebody to at least give you a heads up on what to expect as you go into your first court appearance or your first interaction with a partner who's going to be reviewing something you wrote. Are they a heavy editor? Are they looking for something specific? A lot of people feel like they don't get a good amount of, not cradling, but just mentorship that this job requires. I mean, this is a job that historically was learned by doing, by practicing with somebody else who taught you the ropes. And I think maybe a lot of younger attorneys are feeling that part of it is a little lost.
Yeah, I mean, that has been a consistent theme throughout these podcasts in talking about mentorship, because you're right. I think 3 decades ago, it was young lawyer comes in, has a mentor. The mentor takes them through the first 2-3 years of practice until they get a sense that they know what they're doing.
Right.
And I feel like I hear a lot about how that training has been lost in a lot of firms for whatever reason. And maybe it's because the clients aren't as willing to pay for that training.
Yeah, I think it's probably, that's a big component. The fact that it's kind of hard to run a business and to have an attorney who's not contributing right now that you are training up to do so in the future. A lot of times people are looking for somebody who can just hit the ground running and go. But that person has to get that experience somewhere.
Yeah, where are they going to get it? I mean, that's a a 3rd, 4th year attorney. And so for the ones who are in the first 3 years of practice, it's a challenge, big challenge. And again, we've been hearing that consistently throughout these podcasts from younger attorneys. We had one last month with a summer clerk and a first-year associate who said some of the exact same things. The importance of mentorship is very high on their list to get themselves into a position where they feel comfortable in practice. And that's probably where, that stress is coming from, because they're just not getting that.
Yeah, and I think the money aspect of it is that student loans are significant, and so you feel like you're in a bad environment and it's a job you don't like, you can't leave, because if you don't have something else lined up right away, the thought of going a week or two, never mind like 2 or 3 months without steady income, Navient doesn't care.
Right.
So there is a sort of, I think that's for me, that's always been a stress, is knowing like at the end of the day, I need to have a certain amount of money to pay my student loans. And I can't make a decision based on what I think would be best for my career or my personal satisfaction out of it that doesn't sort of place money first and foremost. And not in like the fun way of like, I want to go on vacations and stuff, but more like, I don't want to get letters in the mail and phone calls from my loan company about a late payment. So I think that's the cost of getting the degree is, just gone up and up and up over the last 30, 40 years. And I don't know that the legal environment has changed with that reality.
What would you tell a new graduate who is coming into the legal practice world under the same challenges that you were facing at that time?
To not overthink it. I think as lawyers, we have a tendency to game plan things out 5, 6, 7 steps ahead, and to constantly be trying to readjust and to make this little tweak. And if I could just go to this place and this firm will be, I can do that. And then I think there was various places in my career where I was comfortable and satisfied, but had a plan that I was trying to work back towards and kind of not really making the most out of whatever situation I was in at the time. And I think that probably would have done me a bigger benefit to make the most out of whatever I was doing, do it fully. And if an opportunity presented itself afterwards, great. I would take advantage of it, but I spent a lot of time searching, trying to find the best angle to make the best of my situation, and kind of forgetting, like, if I just do good work, focused 100% on what I have in front of me, then at the very least, that'll be pretty good. It's a hard thing to do because, the day-to-day stresses and life circumstances kind of push us to keep looking for that better place to be, that better situation, finding the best. And I think lawyers have a bad habit of making the perfect the enemy of the good.
Yeah. What resources can the Young Lawyers Division offer to new lawyers in their first few years of practice? What can you tell those lawyers about what the YLD could help them with?
The thing that the YLD offers beyond sort of general networking, which is always good. It's always good to get talking to other people in other practice areas, other parts of the state, because you never know who's going to be in a position to put your name in for something, to send a client your way, or to send a job offer your way, or vice versa. It's also a good place to commiserate, especially with social media. We all see a certain version of people's lives that is the well-curated, best case scenario version. And sometimes you get, you go to a networking event and you start talking to somebody, and then you start realizing they have the same challenges you have. They have the same complaints or struggles. And all of a sudden, you're not just sort of looking at the heavily curated, idyllic front that people put up, but learning that, okay, I'm not the only one struggling with whatever it is. The biggest thing I think the division provides is opportunities to display leadership and competence in a different way than just day-to-day lawyer work. We put on the Young Lawyers Conference every year, and that's a fairly big event, and it's pretty involved with getting speakers and setting up CLEs and a whole day of events and all these other things. And the president-elect of the YLD, she had ran that committee for a couple of years, and she's thankfully, for her, she's out of it. Finally, she's able to hand the reins over. But she, as a very young attorney, has this experience on her belt of putting together a pretty involved conference, a day-long conference. She's done it twice. So, I don't know many other opportunities where somebody in their late 20s is going to be sort of handed the keys to that, or to, a lot of the other committees that we do that develop a CLE and present it somewhere. These are opportunities that are hard to come by as somebody that's in their first year of practice. And I think the YLD does a really good job of giving people that avenue to shine and to show another set of skills that they can bring to the table or develop them and take them with them in the future.
Well, Anthony, unless there's anything else that you wanted to mention about the YLD or any other advice you had for young lawyers, I'll just say one of the major themes that has been flowing through all of these podcasts is that there's really no one right path in the law. And every guest we've had on this podcast has had a different one. And it's all led them to the same place, which they ultimately found to be their place that they wanted to be. And I think for you, it sounds like you found the area of practice you want to be in. It just took you a little while to get there, but you were persistent and you made the most of your experiences and being able to transfer those into what you're doing now. I think that's really a good message for young attorneys who are coming in and they're not obtaining the job that they want right away. There's going to be other paths that they need to take to get there.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. The last thing I'll add is a shout out to WSLAP, because this job is hard. It's really hard to do it alone. And WSLAP, that arm of the State Bar, was someone I had consulted with several years ago, and they kind of helped me get a good start on a mental health journey that has been a work in progress ever since. And so the biggest thing I can say to any young or old attorney is you have to take care of yourself. Otherwise, you can't take care of anybody. And this job has no shortage of stressful situations, and there's no reason to do it solo.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for listening to our program today. We have here Anthony Procaccio. He's the president of the Young Lawyers Division. Anthony, I just want to say thanks so much for coming on and telling us about your story. And we'll look forward to seeing what you do with the YLD in the next year.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Well, we're signing off. We'll see you next time. It's the Bottom Up Podcast.
Thanks for listening to our podcast. If you have a topic you'd like us to explore, let us know. I'm your host, Emilio Villagale, and we'll catch you next time.